I'm starting a new subreddit. Yeah, it's kinda dark.
Ever since some caveman used a wall to draw the first fictional character, people all over the world have argued over whether Goku could beat their ass in a fight. As such, it's no surprise that a show like Death Battle has been going on for over 10 years. The series is currently in the middle of its anniversary season, and so far there's been all sorts of eventful fights, whether it's a highly requested fight, a remake of a particularly memorable fight, or a fight between two characters who were supposedly banned from the show. And Death Battle is probably the area of YouTube that I've had the most history with, aside from one possible exception. I started watching when Eggman vs. Wily was the most recent fight, had a massive obsession with the series from 2015 to 2016, lost a lot of interest in early 2019, and saw my obsession come back in full force last October. But has anyone ever wondered how Death Battle got to where it is now? Or perhaps what made the series so special in the first place? In honor of the series' 10th anniversary, I will answer both of these questions. I should mention that a while ago, a guy named Redrunner made a similar video, but I thought I could put my own unique spin on the topic. I'll link his video in the description for anyone interested though. I should probably just cut to the chase and begin already. If I continued any longer, I'd just be wasting everyone's time.
Done, huh? Thanks for the tip.
Anyways, here's a fancy schmancy title card that all YouTubers do.
You asked for it, Tubby!
Nobody calls me dummy!
If you wanted to see a hypothetical fight between two fictional characters before Death Battle was created, then Versus debating forums were the place to go to. These forums would mathematically calculate the strength of characters from stuff like comics or anime, and then pit these characters against each other. And these forums would also inspire ScrewAttack's Bensinger to create Death Battle. However, there are two key things that separate Death Battle from the forums that preceded it. The first and most obvious is the fact that while these forums would just talk about who would win, Death Battle would actually animate a fight between the two characters in question. And the second difference relates to one major change in the rule set used to determine the victor, the fact that every episode must end in a death. On top of changing the verdict in the case of characters where steps 2 through 10 are required, this rule gives Death Battle a unique edge. One of the things that fans will look forward to when a new episode premieres is seeing the unique way that the loser will die.
Dude, those animals are so fucking funny, they make me want to merge without looking.
But anyways, I'm gonna split Death Battle's run into 3 different eras: the Classic Era, the Adventure Era, and the Modern Era. The Classic Era is basically just the first season of the show. The first 18 episodes of the show were animated by Bensinger himself, and they haven't aged well, to put it gently. Fights were significantly shorter, the same couple sound effects were constantly reused, and the animation just had this janky feel to it.
Except for keeping track of his woman, somebody needs to throw a GPS tracking bracelet on that bitch.
This was until the Eggman vs. Wily fight. The creation of this fight was so ambitious and time-consuming that it made the show's higher-ups realize that another animator had to be hired. This animator was Mr. Lange, who would play a large role in making the season's last 7 fights significantly more dynamic. But when the last of those 7 fights dropped, everything would change.
Now draw her getting an education.
In a previous video, I've talked about how the first Goku vs. Superman fight was much larger in scale than any Death Battle that preceded it, and arguably any of the ones that followed it. But one thing I didn't bring up was how the fight completely changed the way that Death Battle handled characters. Bensinger has frequently compared the show's earliest fights to shows like Robot Chicken, where the characters aren't being faithfully represented but are instead being parodied. On the other hand, Goku vs. Superman tried to create accurate portrayals of the two characters, and at some points it even felt like a celebration of their two respective franchises. So with this one episode, the show had entered the Adventure Era.
I'm not playing God. All this time, I've been playing human.
The Adventure Era mainly refers to Season 2, but Season 3 and the first half of Season 4 apply to a lesser extent. Season 2 was when the show started to expand and make Season 1 look like a joke. He-Man vs. Lion-O was highly regarded by fans when it came out, Terminator vs. Robocop introduced one of the show's most beloved animators, and Deadpool vs. Deathstroke exploded in popularity. And this was just the beginning, as 2015 was quite possibly the most exciting time to be a fan of the show. Almost every fight this year was eventful in some way. Chuck vs. Segata, Tony vs. Lex, Snake vs. Sam, Wolverine vs. Raiden, and Hercule vs. Dan are all fights that fans hold on a high pedestal to this very day. But that's not to say that all fights were at this level of quality, as some of them were eventful for the wrong reasons. Beast vs. Goliath had one of the weakest fights, Gara vs. Toph and Yang vs. Tifa had some of the show's most questionable verdicts, and Goku vs. Superman 2 had become a subject of ridicule for the entire versus debating community, even to this very day. However, these missteps felt like they were part of the show's charm, and made the show's greatest achievements feel all the more special. This is even true for Season 3, the most heavily disliked season of the show, and also the season with fights like Dante vs. Bayonetta and Hulk vs. Doomsday that many fans would consider to be the best. So it seemed like even when there was a flop like Bowser vs. Ganon, there was always going to be a Ratchet vs. Jack to serve as a palate cleanser. And eventually, Death Battle got to where we are now, the modern era.
Is that the best you can do?
This generally started around the tail end of Season 4. The show would start to make all sorts of changes, whether it was requiring all fights to have a custom track, getting to the point where nearly every fight has professional voice acting, or assembling entire teams of animators to work on fights. These decisions may have seemed bold at the time, but they paid off, and the show has reached its most consistent level of quality. Well, for the most part. Seasons 5 and 6 are what many fans consider to be the best seasons of the show, but they have some tough competition based on what we've seen of Season 8 so far. And while I've done a lot of talking about how the show got to where it is, I think it's time to shift to talking about why it did, or more specifically, what about the show causes millions of fans to keep coming back for more.
Who are you?
Hey, this is Phil from the Small Wiener Club.
The amount of hard work put into every aspect of the fight animations is immense. Both Sprite episodes and 3D episodes have some incredibly fluid animation, and every last episode of the series has multiple talented people working in tandem. These fights can even be accompanied by really good hand-drawn elements, although some elements aren't as good as others. Also, the directors of Death Battle episodes are smart enough to give the animators some degree of freedom, which leads to some incredible moments that weren't originally in the script, like the foot dive combo in Lex vs. Doom. And while the show gives your eyes something to feast on, that's not to say that your ears aren't feasting on anything as well. The show has gotten to the point where it can get professional voice actors to portray the combatants. There's a mix of recognizable names like Kira Buckland, Todd Haberkorn, and Bryce Papenbrook, as well as people like this Adam Park guy who are so good at portraying their character that you swear it's the official voice actor. However, Death Battle doesn't just have good voice acting, as there's plenty of banger tracks to back the vocals up. The first 4 seasons generally stuck to game soundtracks, but things really went up a notch when the show switched to using custom tracks made by Brandon Yates and Fairwolf Media. These tracks can really elevate a fight, and there's plenty of times where a run-of-the-mill fight is salvaged by an amazing music track. Some of my favorite tracks from the show include Chaos Unraveled, Ikari, Emerald Heroes, Chorus of Carnage, Appetite for Greed, and Infection Perfection, but there's way too many bangers to list. Unfortunately, all the production value in the world can only get you so far, but that's no worry for Death Battle, as the show knows how to choreograph great fights. Death Battle's fight choreography stands out among the vast sea of similar fights that can be found online, and there's 2 main reasons that this is the case. For starters, there's the research done on the characters. While Death Battle isn't always the best when it comes to researching characters, the amount of research that they have done still manages to enhance the fight choreography. When Death Battle reflects a fight, they have to do it in such a way that it reflects how they feel the fight would actually play out, which gives each fight its unique flavor. Take Roshi vs. Jiraiya for instance, which shows that the latter would be able to use all sorts of crazy tricks to gain an advantage until the former eventually prevails with brute force alone. Or how about Shredder vs. Silver Samurai, which shows how both characters are at such ridiculous speeds that every hit counts. But this isn't to say that Death Battle is always the best when it comes to this, as anyone who watched Ben vs. Hal can attest to. So that's why Death Battle has a secret ingredient that makes even the fights with bad research a joy to watch. And that special ingredient is a sense of escalation. Death Battle excels at feeling like they're building towards something. Generally, most fights will have combatants gradually using more and more of their power, but some fights will take things a step further. Fights like the Starter Battle Royale will have some sort of environmental destruction, and other fights like Optimus vs. Gundam will have combatants move to another place. But this build-up wouldn't mean anything if it didn't pay off, and Death Battle sure does know how to end a fight spectacularly. Jack vs. Afro ends with a tense one-stroke duel, Hulk vs. Doomsday ends with a long and brutal beatdown, and Virgil vs. Sephiroth ends with a crazy twist ending. And while the well-made fight scenes are the main draw for Death Battle fans, there's another part of the series that's arguably just as important.
Tell me, what cosmic insight have you learned?
Just one thing.
I looked at my penis, I think of the astronaut's helmet, and I go, penis, more like peen-sus!
I'll be honest, I'm mainly here for the fights. While I'll watch the research segments the first 2 or so times, I'll skip them 9 times out of 10 when it comes to any of my endless rewatches. Also, I'm pretty sure that the people who know more about versus debating than me have a gigantic list of grievances against these segments. That being said, the analysis segment still deserves some amount of credit. First of all, there's the editing that goes into these segments. My most played game on Steam is a video editing software, so I I mean it when I say the editing on these segments is incredible. All of the show's editors are immensely talented when it comes to choosing the right footage to bring the combatants' feats to life, or bringing energy to the show's many over-the-top jokes. Special mention goes to Nick Kramer, who's good at making comic panels feel more alive than any ordinary footage. And if I'm giving credit to the analysis segments, it's only natural that I compliment Wiz and Boomstick as well as the writers and voice actors behind them. While their jokes can be hit or miss, and I don't particularly care for their animated avatars, it's hard to deny how much Wiz and Boomstick have added to the series over the years. The gimmick of the smarter host and a dumber one isn't much to write home about, but Ben and Chad managed to pull it off for their sheer amount of chemistry. And finally, my favorite thing about the analysis segments is learning new things about characters I love, and even ones I've never heard of before. This can be anything, whether it's the basic rundown of the character, the more absurd parts of their history, or even the real-world factors that resulted in their creation.
Time, huh? Thanks for the tip.
You are monster?
No!
Every now and then, I'll see someone called Death Battle biased, or allude to the idea that they hate one of the characters or franchises they talked about. And I can't deny that there's definitely some characters who got the shorter end of the stick. However, I wouldn't go as far to say that these mistakes were done out of active malice. In fact, I'd even say that a lot of death battles feel like love letters to the characters being featured. There's many different things that make this the case. The most evident of these things is the large amount of references to stuff that hardcore fans would enjoy, such as when Shadow referenced the iconic Faker scene, or when Hulk used one of Broly's lines. These references can also extend to the analysis segments, like how Venom vs. Bane had a Bane pose, or how Mega Man vs. Astro Boy referenced this masterpiece. But references would get annoying if they were overused, and there's a handful of death battles where this is the case. So that's why there's plenty of death battles that go beyond simple references and feel like they could only be created by someone truly passionate about the characters represented. One thing that comes to mind was how Yoda had a character arc mid-fight and switched from using his prequel fighting style to exclusively using the Force like he did in the original trilogy. Also, I've never watched RWBY, but I've heard from people who have watched it that White vs. Mitsuru treated the former character more respectfully than the actual series. And considering that death battle pitted her against a character who's completely immune to her main method of attack, that's actually kinda sad. Death battles can often feel like an advertisement of the best aspects of the series, and I'm confident that I speak for many when I say there's plenty of series that I got into specifically because of death battle. It was a big reason that 15-year-old me got into anime, and it made 14-year-old me briefly consider getting into comics, although the latter didn't really work out. And even now, I watched all of Hellsing Ultimate in May just because there's a chance that Death Battle will do Dio vs. Alucard this year. But now, there's one last thing that makes Death Battle so special. And surprisingly, this thing doesn't have to do with anything within an actual episode of the show. What am I talking about exactly?
I create fear and disruption.
Online, we call that trolling.
For a simple YouTube show, Death Battle has a surprisingly active fanbase. And honestly, I actually really enjoy being part of this fanbase. Now granted, there's some bad parts of the Death Battle fanbase, like with most fandoms, but as I discussed in the JoJo video, I feel that the good that comes from most fanbases vastly outweighs the bad. As a start, there's a mountain of fan art that comes from Death Battle fans, and this mountain keeps getting bigger with every new episode. Not only that, but there's also an active community of people who write their own Death Battles on places like DeviantArt and the Death Battle Fanon Wiki. And additionally, there's plenty of Death Battle fans who do calculations on characters themselves so that they can determine the winners of upcoming episodes and the accuracy of past episodes. However, if you want to find the bulk of Death Battle fan content, you can do so on the website you're on right now, as there's a plethora of different fan videos dedicated to the series. For starters, you can find a massive amount of fan-made trailers that mimic the style of the official trailers. Next, there's reaction videos, which are a pretty controversial type of content in a lot of spheres of YouTube. In spite of that, reactions to Death Battle episodes are actually encouraged by the creators of the show, and individual reactors have become respected members of the community. And lastly, there's a new trend among the fanbase where channels like Biffweed and Nemesis Bloodreich would make scripted reviews of new episodes as they drop. With those last two types of content, it seems like part of the fun of every new episode is seeing what people in the community have to say about it. Take the recent Blake vs. Mikasa episode for instance. For one of the most notable Death Battle reactors, this episode was actually the one they wanted the most. So even though I didn't particularly care for the episode, I still got some enjoyment from seeing people in the community who were genuinely happy for it. But this brings us to the last part of the Death Battle community that I want to talk about, and it's one of the core practices of the community. That practice is, of course, how fans will list the matchups that they want to see as actual episodes. I guess the best comparison would be that within the Death Battle fanbase, talking about the matchups you want to see is kind of like talking about the characters you want to see in Smash Bros. Except the only difference is that we don't have a single Fire Emblem character. Whenever there's a new Death Battle, one of the most exciting parts has to be that next time screen. There's so much intrigue over what the next match could be. It could be a match you saw tons of requests for. It could be a cool idea for a match that you genuinely never thought of. It could even be a match that you personally wanted, or it could be another Marvel vs. DC match. So I think I'm gonna end this segment in the only way I see fit, a quick top 10 of the matchups that I personally really want. Honorable mentions are on the screen right now, but let's just jump right into it. Number 10, Okuyasu vs. Kuwabara. Shout out to Idiot Best Friends. Gotta be one of my favorite genders. Number 9, Guts vs. Dimitri. I really want to see Guts return so we can see more of the thematic parts of this character beyond what we saw in Guts vs. Nightmare. And I also want to see Fire Emblem on Death Battle, so this fight would be a win-win. Number 8, Jason Voorhees vs. Michael Myers. A legacy match between two of pop culture's most iconic slashers. Number 7, Bruno Bucciarati vs. Trafalgar Law. A fight between two of the more unconventional members of both of their respective power systems. Number 6, Dragon Ball Evolution Goku vs. Superman 64 Superman. A Hercule vs. Dan style match where the point is to make fun of both the combatants, but this time the combatants are bastardizations of beloved characters. And I unironically want this more than an actual Goku vs. Superman stray. Number 5, Jack Frost vs. Slime. A matchup between two beloved JRPG enemies. Maybe you can get older variants and make this a full-on war so we can finally have a true successor to Eggman vs. Wily. Number 4, Spike Spiegel vs. Gene Starwind. In terms of matchups between two anime characters, this would be a nice change of pace from the standard battle shooting characters. Number 3, Homer Simpson vs. Peter Griffin. A legacy match between two characters I have a lot of attachment to, whether it's for the parts of the shows that are genuinely great or the parts that have been memed into oblivion. Number 2, the Chad Ego vs. Mogo. This, along with Scarecrow vs. Mysterio, are the two Marvel vs. DC matchups that I would personally be really excited for. The idea of two sentient planets fighting each other to the death is simultaneously the dumbest idea and the most hype idea. Also, I guarantee that the announcement of this fight will somehow result in world peace being achieved. Number 1, Journal vs. Joker. This fight is hell for anyone who actually cares about determining who would win, but I don't care. Seeing two incredibly absurd powers clashing against each other is going to be fun, and I can't wait to chow down on popcorn while reading comments from the losers' fans.
Time for the climactic finale!
If I had to give you my 5 favorite YouTube channels in no particular order, they would be H-Bomber Guy, Super Hutchwolf, Amp Lemon, Internet Historian, and of course, Death Battle themselves. But I feel like using the label of YouTube channel when talking about Death Battle is kind of awkward, because honestly, they've transcended the realm of simple YouTubers, to the point where they feel close to an actual TV show to me. Like, I'm normally terrible when it comes to avoiding spoilers for most things, but I genuinely make sure to avoid finding out who wins the next Death Battle episode, even when the fight is an obvious stomp. I guess what I'm trying to say is that for me and a lot of other people, Death Battle episodes don't feel like ordinary YouTube videos. They feel like events. Seeing all the new episodes of Season 8 has made me remember why I love this dumb YouTube show so much. And as the years go on and the show hits new heights and lows, my love for it will always be there. To everyone who works on Death Battle, whether you're a showrunner, an animator, a writer, a researcher, a composer, an editor, or a voice actor, I just have to say one thing. Thank you. Now that's all cool and good, but it's time for a new segment that I like to call Shamelessly Begging for Algorithm Interactions. Basically, I'm so starved for attention that I'm gonna ask questions that you are going to answer in the comments so that I can pretend my video will do better in the algorithm. Today's question is, are you a fan of Death Battle? And if so, what's your favorite episode? But anyways, that's it for now. Thanks for watching.